Hello everyone. I'm in the gardens of the Hampton Court Palace, and there couldn't be a better time to be here because the tulips are in full bloom, lending their color and gaiety to the whole place. The weather is just perfect, balmy without being too hot. I thought since I'm here, let me share a few things that I learned in the rooms inside. This is a Tudor and a Georgian dynasty palace, and the rooms are replete with the history of King Henry VIII, who is infamous for having executed two of his wives, annulled his marriage to the other two, one unfortunately died, and one continued. Now, let us talk about King Henry VIII and his marriages because I found it very interesting. He was married to Catherine of Aragon and he wanted to get his marriage annulled with her. The Pope would have nothing of it. But King Henry, he's an autocrat. And he says that the Kingdom of England will be separate from papal aristocracy. And as a result, he annuls his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, to whom he's been married for 24 years, and marries Anne. Now, Anne is known for her vivacity, her wit, her charm, her intellect, and with the desire to have a male heir from Anne, and of course being attracted to her enormously, Henry gets married to Anne. Anne has a daughter, and they have a supposed miscarriage or still childbirth, that is not very clear. But what is clear is that Anne will not be able to give him a male heir. On charges of adultery, Henry executes Anne at the Tower of London. And who comes in next? The one who comes in next is Jane Seymour. Who is Jane Seymour? She is a lady in waiting. She has been a lady in waiting to the Queen earlier. And lo and behold, what happens? With Jane Seymour, the long cherished dream of having a male heir comes true. But there is an anticlimax of sorts that happens. While Jane delivers a male child, Edward, she dies a couple of days after childbirth due to an infection. Now, Henry the cruel, Henry the autocrat, Henry the dictator of sorts, he's continuing with what he wishes to do, at least with his marriages, he is sad. It comes across as quite a contradiction considering that he had no qualms pushing aside Catherine of Aragon, beheading Anne on charges of adultery. But with Jane Seymour's death, he is overcome with sorrow. And so starts a campaign of finding him another wife. This time, this is another Anne, who happens to be the sister of a duke from Germany. There is a portrait which is painted of hers and sent to Henry, and he finds her quite good enough in terms of physical appearance, her features, to marry her. But soon after, he gets rather bored of her and wants to get this marriage annulled. Thankfully, Anne, who's smart enough to get out of the marriage alive than be beheaded at the Tower of London, agrees for the annulment. And she's declared the king's sister and gets a nice place to stay, a few servants, a kingly apartment. So Anne moves out of this marriage rather unscathed. And now comes Katherine Howard. She's a 17-year-old bursting with energy and youth, whereas we have Henry, who's into his 50s now. And he is besotted by Katherine Howard. And he says, with his eyes set on this young girl, he gets married to her. All goes well in the Kingdom of Eden until Catherine has an affair with a courtier. What happens is that the king refuses to believe it. He's so in love with Catherine. But there's someone else to whom she was betrothed to, and she'd had an affair with him. And that guy confesses. Boom. Both are executed, the courtier and the person whom she was betrothed to. And what happens to Katherine Howard? Well, what can you expect? She gets beheaded in the Tower of London too. 5 queens come and gone, Henry VIII still continuing. Finally, he settles down with, let me not say settles down for, settles down with a widow who's also relatively closer to him in age, and her name is Katherine Parr. Apparently, this is a combination which works fairly well, and Katherine Parr gets him reconciled with his earlier daughters, Elizabeth and Mary. What is very interesting, I thought, here is, as we were going through the little write-ups in the rooms, is that we couldn't figure out Katherine who. He was just married to Katherine. He got the marriage annulled. There's another Katherine. So, Katherine and Anne are the two names, with the exception of Joan of Seymour, of course, who is, I think, the fourth wife. So the first wife was Catherine of Aragon. He gets married to Anne, then to Jane Seymour, and then it's Katherine again, and then it's Anne again, and then Katherine, and finally Katherine. So rather interesting, and I hope you've all enjoyed watching this video with me. I didn't want to get into many historical facts, but just the little that I have learned from my walk around this magnificent palace and these beautiful gardens. Please do enjoy the sight of tulips behind me.